To President-elect Bush, but I expect that if he does what he says, and that is to sit down as he goes along with the congressional leadership and talk about how he's going to effectuate a kinder, gentler America, he will have enthusiastic support on that agenda, a kinder, gentler America. We'll have our disagreements, we'll have our fights, but I believe there's plenty of room for cooperation because there are plenty of problems.
Senator, do you also think that he's going to somehow address his problems with Bob Dole, because there is some friction between those two parts within the Republican Party?
Well, I quite frankly see potentially more difficulty on a personal basis between the President-elect and the Republican leadership than I do between the President-elect and the Democratic leadership. Bob Dole is a man of strong feelings and great strength, and I suspect, I guess if I were going to recommend anything to the President-elect is sit down with Bob Dole as well as the newly elected Democratic leadership when we do that in late November.
The fact that George Bush had very little coattails bringing in other Republican congressmen, do you think that loses a bit of his effectiveness on the Hill?
Well, I think it's going to make it more difficult. It's clear to me that there was no mandate in this election. This was not a Ronald Reagan election. This was not a case where Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 84 went to the country with a specific agenda and said, this is what I want to do, and in fact got overwhelming support after having said in strong terms what he wished to do. George Bush spent most of his time talking about Willie Horton and not about education. He says he wants to be the education president. I don't think you or I or anyone knows what he means by that. So I don't think there was, I think there weren't coattails in large part because many of us in America did not know precisely what George Bush meant by what he wanted to do, by a kinder, gentler America, by how he was going to be the education president. And I think, so I don't see any direct correlation between those running for the House and the Senate and the views that they spoke out on and George Bush at this point. So it will take some time. What negative campaigns do is they obscure the possibility of generating mandates, and mandates are positive. Mandates aren't negative. Mandate means there is a strong move for something particular to happen. And that did not occur in this election, and it's not impossible by a long shot, but it's going to be imperative that George Bush, I believe, in the first 6 or 8 months of his presidency, set out what he wishes to do with some degree of specificity.
And Senator, if you can quickly, to deal with the budget deficit, should he let Congress bring it up first, or should he set the agenda?
I think it's the responsibility of the President to set the agenda, and I hope he will not dismiss this commission, which quite frankly, and put it very bluntly, will give everyone the opportunity to do the right thing without either side being fearful that the other side is going to demagogue against
Well, that fight's already started this morning. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Nice to see you.
It's 4 minutes before the hour.
Not today.
Honeymoon? It depends on his approach. To the degree that he comes to define the kinder, gentler America with real programs and reaches out and works with the Democratic Congress, yes, he will.
Okay, he's coming to you with a shopping list, obviously. What's the Senate shopping list in return?
The Senate shopping list is very much the kind of agenda we've been setting for the past few years. A civil rights bill, a clean water bill, a highway bill, child care, catastrophic health insurance, responding to our competitive needs abroad, and dealing with the deficit, above all. We wanted to deal with the deficit. We tried to sit down with the administration, and the flexible freeze is going to have to be given definition. If flexible freeze is merely more of the same, we've got a problem. He's got a tough choice here. Reduce spending. Where's he going to do it? Raise revenue. He says he isn't going to do it. How do you have a child care program, environmental initiatives, and define yourself as the education president without answering those questions? We're ready to work with him. And I guarantee you there's a Congress that's thirsty for a partnership with the executive to deal with these things and a readiness to be bipartisan. I think it's clear he has yet to define whatever this mandate or whatever it is that took place last night.
Are you at all encouraged at his refusal to rule out what was called revenue enhancers at that press conference?
Well, I'm not sure yet what the appropriate approach is. I'm certainly encouraged by his unwillingness to rule anything out. That is important at this point in time. But a lot of this has got to be given a definition, Brian, which clearly last night, in its electoral sense, didn't do. Mm-hmm. It was much more a campaign against what they defined Michael Dukakis to be, rather than what they defined his vision to be.
Senator.
But we are all obviously gratified when this country gets a new president. It's an important moment,
okay,
and we're ready to try to work.
Senator John Kerry, again, I thank you for being with us, and I apologize for the communications. We're going to come back in just a moment. Another hour to go after the station.
She was kidnapped just 4 months ago, and the search is still on.
Chance of winning some southern states and Rocky Mountain states. I mean, you just can't start off 180 electoral votes down and expect to win. There's no margin for error. So I think that lesson came through loud and clear last night. One thing I will say, taking nothing away from Bush's victory, it was big, it was deserved. But it's interesting to me that while he was winning so big, the House increased number of Democrats, the Senate increased number of Democrats, and the governorship increased number of Democrats. So kind of a mixed result in the electorate. But still, getting back to the point, the Democrats are simply going to have to figure out a way to get competitive in the South.
You know, that's, go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead, Pat. No, you go ahead.
Well, that's dead right in the South. And the South is going to have more electoral votes in 1992 as a consequence of reapportionment. But, Charlie, if you take a look there, Benson is very strong in the South. The fellow down there, McKay in Florida, ran even where George Bush won the state by 20 points. Chuck Robb swept Virginia. There are Democrats who can win the South and win big in southern states. But the problem is Bob's party hadn't figured out a way to get these guys on the top of their ticket.
Well, that's the question. Was it a flawed, is it a situation where a Massachusetts governor simply couldn't win? You need somebody from the West or South? Or was it a candidate, Bob Beckel, who could have won but just blew it?
Well, Charlie, I think Dukakis ran a good race near the end, and obviously he didn't run a good race after the convention. But I think, is it possible for a liberal from the North to win? Sure it is, and I wouldn't want to discount somebody like Cuomo. But the fact is, you start off behind so deeply in the Electoral College that it seems to me that where the only place we've had success as a party was when Jimmy Carter, a Southerner, ran. So I think, though, the rules are going to have to change of the party, Charlie, if that's going to happen, and that's going to require a major fight in the Democratic Party.
Or candidates, if they run from that section of the country, who moderate their image. I mean, if you give up 138 electoral votes off the top, or maybe even more in 1990 in the South, 40 or 50 more in the mountain states, the Republicans start with 2/3 of the votes needed for election.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the math is so clear on this thing, and I think even the most diehard liberal, and I consider myself one of them, has to understand the math here. And the math is that if you start off that far behind, the chance of winning are 1 in 10 at best.
But look, Charlie, let me add something, though. George Bush took Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, California, Missouri. Now, when I came into politics about 25 years ago, we are talking about Democratic states the Republicans had a tremendously difficult time winning. The Catholic vote in America is moving out of the Democratic Party. Nixon got only 20% of it in 1960s, while Jack Kennedy beat him in those states. Bush now got almost 45%. Reagan went over that. It is the Catholics in the North, as well as those white Protestants in the South, who are leaving that party, and social conservatism is the reason, I think. I think a lot of these fellows support the programs out of Congress, Social Security and all the rest. It's social conservative that's killing you, I think.
With 20/20 hindsight, Bob Beckel, should he have taken John Glenn as his vice presidential choice, and the Texas strategy was doomed from the beginning?
Well, Charlie, I think he had to try to win Texas, and the answer is probably no. I mean, if he'd gotten Glenn, the question is, could he have won Ohio? Ohio was a big win for Bush, but I think Pat made a couple of points of the industrial states that he lost. Glenn may have been slightly more helpful there than Benson, but I really don't think so. I think he made the right choice. He had to try to go for Texas. You can't win. Democrats have never won the White House without the state of Texas.
Pat Buchanan, very interesting, the news conference in Houston. Right away, George Bush sounds like he's ready to manage, names James Baker as his Secretary of State, and then says, and I wonder how the conservatives react, no, I'm not particularly interested in a constitutional amendment on abortion and the line item veto on the balanced budget amendment, etc.
No, wide open constitutional convention. There's a lot of conservatives who are opposed to that idea. There are very few like me that are interested in that idea, as a matter of fact. But Charlie, that was a very crisp press conference. Ronald Reagan's great fort is that televised address looking right into that camera. He's not the greatest man at a press conference we've ever seen. But Bush was really crisp and sharp. I think he's going to use that more. The choice of Baker, conservatives had real problems with Schultz, is expected. I don't think there's going to be any problem with that with the conservatives. Interestingly enough, he named Craig Fuller chief of the transition, and Sheila Tate press secretary to the transition, but neither of them to White House jobs, although he did name the White House counsel and the White House director of personnel.
Put Bob Teeter, too, in the transition team as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. It sounds as if...
Taking polls for the transition.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what he does besides polling. But he sounds like the president, Bob Beckel, the president/manager.
Yeah, it does, Charlie. I was sitting with Pat. We were watching that. We were both commenting on the fact it's been a long time since you heard a president give a good, crisp news conference, and I've got to give Bush credit. It seems like he wants to take charge. He used words like, I want to have a whole new team, which I think is going to send a lot of shivers up the spine of some of these cabinet members and the Reagan administration thought their jobs were secure with Bush coming in. But I think with Bush really, the thing I took out of that, being a Democrat, Charlie, was I think he made the right overtures to the Congress. He's going to have to do that. This is not a guy that's going to be able to go out over the heads of the American people or the Congress and appeal to the American people. He'll do it by consensus, and he started that, I think, today.
But he sent one signal, too. It is that, look, we're open to working with the Congress, but the agenda is no new taxes, and there aren't going to be new taxes, which suggests to me that that's one of the first battlegrounds that's coming.
We'll see about that. We'll see about that.
And that will be a fitting topic on which we can resume when we discuss later on the Bush administration as it moves forward. Bob Beckel, thank you very much. Pat Buchanan, always a pleasure. Thank you guys for being here. It's 23 minutes after the hour. We'll be back. Tip O'Neill and
during the primaries, but could not escape during this campaign. Finally, this was not a campaign based on issues. Voters said the economy was their #1 concern, but except in the South, they split their votes almost equally between Dukakis and Bush, which is not much of a mandate for action on the economy by the new president. Lynn Scher, ABC News, New York.
And a last word this morning, you should watch for some big changes at the White House. For instance, President Reagan's beloved jelly beans are right on the way out. George Bush is going to be bringing in his pork rinds and popcorn. In true Texas style, President-elect Bush hates vegetables and he loves country music. And those horse rides are out. Pitching horseshoes is in. White House reporters are warned to stay out of the line of fire. And that's the latest news. Let's pitch it over to Spencer for a look at weather. Spence?
Okay, Bob. Democratic control. Earlier this morning, I talked with two veterans of the long-running war between the White House and Congress. Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House during the first years of the Reagan administration. He was in Boston. In Miami, Howard Baker, former White House Chief of Staff, and before that, the Republican leader in the Senate. I asked Senator Baker what he thought it would be like for President Bush to be dealing with a Democratic Congress.
I think it's going to be pretty good. I think George Bush is uniquely suited to the task. That is, he knows a lot of people on the Hill. He understands the House and Senate. He served in the House. He presided over the Senate. And by nature, I think George understands the necessity to negotiate. So I expect that he'll be a consensus president, and I expect he'll have extensive personal contact with the leadership on both sides in the House and Senate. We don't know who the leadership is going to be, really, on the Senate side yet. They've got a hot contest on the Democratic side. But I expect one of the first things that George Bush will do, and probably before January 20th, is try to establish a personal rapport, a personal relationship with the congressional leadership, the bipartisan leadership. That's his nature. And I think that would be the most important first step that he could take under these circumstances.
Mr. Speaker, will it work? Do you think the Democrats will be in a conciliatory mood with him?
Well, the interesting thing is that Jim Wright, who is the Speaker, likes to talk about Sam Rabin, who is his idol. I remember when I was first elected, Eisenhower was elected as president, we went into the caucus, and Sam Rabin says any jackass can kick over the barn. It takes a carpenter to build one. We're doers and builders, and we're going to work for the betterment of America. And actually, during the Eisenhower administration, Sam Rabin worked better with the president than did his own leadership within his own party. Jim is a little upset about the sleaze factor because he brought him in. With a little time, the Democrats are America's first, and he's going to have his problems for a while, but everything will turn out for the best.
But problem number one is going to be the deficit, and George Bush has been very emphatic during this campaign on the tax issue. That is something you wrestled with again and again, Senator Baker, with the Republican president, how to deal with that. Is he going to be able to deal with it?
I think he will, Charlie. I really think the biggest untold story in this country on the domestic scene is the fact that the budget deficit has been going steadily down for the last several years. 3 years ago, I guess, it was $220 billion, and then this year it's 155, and under Graham Rudman it's scheduled to be about 108, if I remember correctly, in the following year. And that's a pretty good downward glide slope. And indeed, I think, if you send it down at a much steeper rate than that, it might have an unfortunate effect on the economy. So I think George has a good, President-elect Bush has a as a good point of departure. I think we're headed in the right direction, and I think he can maintain that improvement in the deficit situation without raising taxes. I think he can do that.
But, Mr. Speaker, that deficit is coming down basically because money is coming in